Going to go on really and explore some of the issues that were raised by our presenters, but particularly looking at the theme here, which is living and diverse Atlantic Ocean. And can I ask all of our panelists to please join me on stage now. Andreas Kramer from the Oceano Azul Foundation in Portugal. Tandiwe Gaxba, the Acting Executive Secretary with the Technical Services Benguela Current Convention in Namibia. Shimrit Perkol-Finkel from EConcrete Initiative in Israel. And finally, Ellen Kensington, research scientist with the Fisheries and Oceans in Canada. One of the people on the programme, Joanna Dupont-Inglis, unfortunately cannot join us for this. And can I just please ask your forgiveness for all my very bad pronunciations. Do I have my microphone on? No. Well, okay, I'll tell you what, I can't change the battery now. So I'll use this instead, and during the break we'll change the battery. Okay. So we'll share a mic, and then actually, I think we're better off this time. So you have a mic and the two of you share, and then Andreas and I will share. Okay, very good. Can you all hear me? Yes. Very good, okay. Microphones, videos, these are the things that can cause trouble. Okay, so let me ask you each a question. Like I did with the first panel debate, the first two, and maybe each of you can address that. Very simple question, and maybe if I can go to you first, Andreas. What solutions do you think research and innovation can do to scale up and deploy to protect and restore the health of the Atlantic Ocean and address some of the problems we've been hearing about this morning?
I'll do that, but let me first say that I love this panel for the gender balance, and because the number of panelists is somewhat smaller, so we might actually have some time for discussions afterwards. Thank you for including us as the Oceano Azul Foundation on behalf of the philanthropic community of not only foundations but also many conservation organizations that are focused on the planet. We sometimes conduct science, we sometimes finance science, but all of us, most of the time, actually use insights from science, so this is an important dialogue to have. We take scientific insights and we try to mobilize them into actionable information for decision makers. That is something that perhaps organizations such as foundations, such as NGOs, conservation organizations, advocacy organizations can do better than many natural scientists themselves. As one of the efforts, and I will hold this up, is we've just written a 4-page document that answers many of the questions that you've asked. It's called Rise Up, a Blue Call for Action. And we developed it, of course, like everybody these days, with an eye on the United Nations Ocean Conference in June in Lisbon. For us, the conference is actually going to take place just outside of the Oceanario where we as a foundation are based. It was 26 organizations, foundations, conservation organizations, and representatives of communities that are dependent on the ocean in one way or another, writing up 11 goals and 28 priority actions. Some of them need additional science input, but many do not. And this is my first answer to your question. We know what is harming the ocean. We don't need any science, and any natural science, to explain how the damage is done. We know that. We need social science to explain to us how we get the politicians and the business leaders to act. This is not something that natural scientists can do. We need to involve the other disciplines a little bit more. I'm speaking English here. When people use the word scientist in English or science in English, they mean natural science. English speakers are not even aware of the bias that they have. As a German, to me, a lawyer is a Rechtswissenschaftler, a legal scientist. A linguist is a Sprachwissenschaftler, a language scientist. We have an image of equality of that. So I think this is important, and I want to underline that we're not going to get any further unless we bring the social sciences into the discussion and into the research as well, and have the co-interpretation. Now, you wanted to have precise answers on what is needed. Two things I think I want to say is, one is when we look at the exchange of gases and of energy between the atmosphere and the ocean, the physics and the chemistry of it, we know quite a lot. But then we don't know what is happening below the ocean all that much, because that is no longer chemistry and physics. This is biology. It's biological processes. And how the biological processes in the ocean contribute to the carbon cycle, what roles they play in there, that is something that I think is important to create stronger links between physics and chemistry on the one hand and biology on the other, in order to understand how the system as a whole behaves. And the second point is just to repeat, yes, we also need to expand that to the social sciences and humanities. Thank you.
And just on that point, Andreas, that document you have there, the Rise Up, you say there are how many solutions do you have in it?
We have 28 priority actions.
28 priority actions.
Yes.
Can you just give us the first top 3 that you have, just to give people an idea of what you're proposing?
First of all, I would say is go to riseupfortheocean.org as one word without any gaps, all letters, no numbers in that. And there you find it all. You find it in different translations, and you can actually sign up for it if that is what you want to do. We say the first one is to restore the ocean, and we have 6 priority actions in order to get that done. The second one is invest immediately in a net zero carbon emissions future. This is action on land, not in the ocean, because most of the damage is caused by activities on land. Speed the transition to a circular and sustainable economy. It's a little bit more precision in that, but it does include a number of items on the blue economy, sustainable blue economy, and how to integrate the natural capital thinking into decision-making in the ocean and on land, and also to empower coastal and island communities. All this doesn't work without governance. We need to improve global governance at various levels. And one specific call is protect 30% of the ocean by 2030, but that's not a new one. We didn't invent that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So if I can go to you, Thandiwe Gaba, the Acting Executive Secretary, Technical Services, Benguela Current Convention in Namibia. What ideas do you have in terms of looking at how research and innovation can be scaled up to protect the ocean?
Thank you very much for the question.
I think you need to push it in a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. But maybe because before I even come to your answer, I need really to thank the Alliance for inviting the Benguela Current Convention to be part of this meeting today. It's the first time the BCC is represented here. I understand this is the second Alliance Forum to be held. The Benguela Current Convention, briefly, I would like just say a few things about it, indicate that it is a multi-sectoral intergovernmental organization that was established by the governments of the countries, of 3 countries, namely Angola, Namibia, and South Africa, which share the coastline, the southwestern coastline of the Atlantic Ocean, from where they are located. And it was science, fortunately, that really informed the establishment of the Benguela Current Convention, because initially the countries needed to understand the dynamics in the ocean that influenced the fish, the movement of fish in the ocean. And that was actually the first sector that brought the 3 countries together. However, as I've indicated, the BCC is now a multi-sectoral LME, large marine ecosystem, which is focusing specifically on 4 sectors that utilize the ocean, these being the environment, maritime transport, fisheries, and minerals and energy. So the 4 sectors in each country cooperate in all the activities that the BCC undertakes, and they're functioning effectively. And they are really using science to understand some of the phenomena in the region, such as, for instance, as I've indicated, the need to understand the seasonal variability in the ocean and the upwelling which influenced the movement of fish stocks that was needed in order to inform management decisions at both policy and user level. Maybe it is important for me to highlight the fact that the Benguela current large marine ecosystem is by nature highly variable, even without the influence of climate change. So now and then additional information is always needed to understand certain phenomena that happen around the region. Specifically, if I were to come to your question, to answering your question, I've got maybe 3 proposals to make.
Just hold the microphone up close
Yeah,
to
I will.
you.
Yes,
Thank you.
there are 3 proposals to make. Firstly, I will start by saying, as we all know, we are still missing a lot of information, maybe comprehensive evaluation on ecosystem goods and services that are provided by the ocean, such as the ocean as the climate regulator, which is a very important ecosystem service that the ocean has been providing and which has not been valued because it is not traded in the markets. I feel and believe it is one area where we need to get more information. I know there are models that are currently being used for valuing ecosystem goods, but I feel these are not given the value they deserve because really there's no monetary value, monetary exchange may be given to them. For instance, if one looks at the role of, in addition to the ocean as regulating the current, if you look at our mangroves and the role they play in absorbing wave energy and creating habitats from species that live and breed in those areas, the values for those, are not really known to everyone. Who has got access and using the ecosystem and the ocean at large. If you look at our coral reefs, if you look at our seagrass and various species and other species in the ocean that sometimes get overexploited because people cannot really appreciate their value. Really, for me, one of the key areas that we need to focus on is evaluation of the ecosystem goods and services. And then, secondly, I would say, we all know, we're aware that with technological advances, now, yeah, that was a tongue twister for me. With technological advances, now, scientists and researchers are able to reach areas which were previously inaccessible, even for extracting marine resources purposes. Now people reach depths and areas which they couldn't before. How this leads to then is, sorry, I just need to check where I am in what I'm doing. What we need for that, I feel that we need to be very cautious and apply the precautionary principle in whatever we do in the marine ecosystem. Because with all these advances, we've always had various advances. It's all well and good, but we really need to be cautious in what we're doing because by reaching the areas that were previously inaccessible, we may do harm and destroy some valuable resources and information down there, which would be useful for future generations during that time when we're all gone with all the good work that we've done with our technological advances.
If you don't mind, I may stop you there because actually you're raising a point that I'm going to go to for question 2, so we'll come back to you for that. Thank you very much for that. I want to put that same question to you then, because again, it's good to get all 4 panelists' views first. So again, Shimrit Perkol-Finkel from the EConcrete project in Israel, maybe briefly your views on that.
Thank you, and thank you for your response, which I echo very much a lot of your input. First, let me start by, again, thanking the Commissioner and Sigi for bringing me here. Today, I was very honored this year in 2019 to receive one of the recipients on the Women Innovators Award, so I'm really proud to be here. My background is marine biology. I did my PhD, my postdoc in the field, and at a certain stage, because I wanted to bring a solution to the industry to really make a change, I stepped out of the academia, maybe not 100% out, but I did step into the commercial world and established a company which is called EConcrete. So it's a real private enterprise, a small one, that is seeking to provide concrete solutions for coastal and marine infrastructure so that we could build our coastal defenses and we could build the risk reduction measures for those small island communities in a way that also builds biodiversity. So that's kind of in essence what I do. And from my perspective, how can we bring solutions and what should those solutions be is definitely something that is cross-disciplinary and multifunction. I don't think we can afford anymore to find solutions that are single source, one target. If we're building offshore energy, those offshore energy facilities also have to accommodate marine life and increase biodiversity. We need to use our space in a much more efficient way because obviously our oceans are very precious and the marine ecosystem needs to be sustained and enhanced, which is really why I personally took on this mission of changing the way industries are functioning in that space. When we are building structures for maritime industries, for energy industries, or even for cities. Until now, people have focused only on one purpose. We need to build a coastline, we need to defend the people, we need to build a maritime pathway, but why not also think about the ecosystem? So when we are designing our ports, or when we are designing coastal defense measures, we have to also think about the ecology that is being created on these structures. Really the concept of taking different industries and making them more accessible and more applied. I think that the research and development in academia is crucial. It's super important, but it needs to also be adapted in order to really seamlessly integrate into the real world. And that transition is not very simple to do and to really make those solutions more accessible to the practices of our developers in those intersections. Finally, one part of the question was about designing with nature. And I think, again, this is something that we have to take into consideration when we are advancing our coastal ecosystems and our coastal communities. How can we take the needs of the local ecosystem? How can we tailor really the ecosystem needs? If we need an oyster reef enhanced or restored or a coral reef enhanced, how can we take those needs and integrate them into our practices, even if they're not directly related to restoration? When we're building a coastal defense scheme, can we bring along some of those habitat features into that solution in a way that not only increases biodiversity, but also increases the resilience and the adaptivity of those structures?
Can I just maybe very quickly, can you tell us what your project, EConcrete, is doing in that regard?
Sure.
Because you talked just very, very quickly, because I think
we're not getting a sample. I always carry concrete. We've developed a concrete that enhances marine growth. We work on the concrete composition, on the surface texture, and on the three-dimensional design in order to make any concrete structure in the coastal and marine environment thrive as an ecosystem. So instead of just building a seawall, we're actually creating a habitat. And we're doing that without compromising the strength or the functionality of the structure. So it's a real win-win solution.
So what is in that then that's different to regular concrete?
We're changing about 10% of the cementous materials. Our admix is nearly entirely byproducts of different industries like quarry industries. And those 10% basically neutralize some of the more harsh components in the concrete and allow for biodiversity to thrive. From our works, we've managed to basically double the species diversity, get a higher richness, greater live cover, and even reduction in the dominance of invasive species, because we can really integrate designs that are mimicking some of those natural features into operational structures like pier piles or marinas or ports.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So let's go to you, Ellen Kensington, research scientist with Fisheries and Oceans in Canada. Same question, how do you get research and innovation to scale up to protect the ocean, but also to maybe restore its health as well?
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me here today. I very much appreciate the opportunity. And to answer that question, I think I'd rather fall back to some things I learned by attending the UN Decade for Ocean Science workshop for the North Atlantic last month. And we discussed this in many ways, and I think what's not coming across is the urgency with which we need information. And all these things we're hearing about are fantastic, and they should definitely be proceeding, and it should be part of a societal shift to how we interact with the sea. But at that meeting, it was very clear, and I'll reiterate what was said by the first speaker, Andres, is that we need to have the biological complement to the great physical data that's been emerging. And fortunately, some of these, the foresight of the people who designed the Horizon 2020 projects had this in mind, because we've had the Atlas and the Sponges projects both providing information, and I'm sure many others as well, that have positioned us better than we would have been to start addressing that. But it was felt that at that meeting that the way to deal with this urgency is to focus on understanding the structure and the functioning of the ocean and just what the tipping points are. Because if we don't want to have chaos coming down in the next years and having unthought of responses. We want to have as much of this planned as possible, and that requires prediction. And fortunately, in this new round of projects, you heard from Murray about iAtlantic, they actually have a working package dedicated to identifying tipping points in the world's ocean, from the North and South Atlantic, from organisms as small as single individuals, through laboratory experimentation, right through to ecosystem levels. And we're still not sure how successful that will be, but there's been a lot of innovative thought in how to do that. And some of it is taking some of these long-lived organisms and going back in the past to see how they've fared through looking at their previous responses to environmental change, and then testing them in the lab to see how they respond to quicker accelerated changes, and also the cumulative impacts and so on. So I think that the biology, it's so complex. We're being asked to respond to a changing physical environment, and really we need to have some solutions in the next 10 years. So I think we need to separate our activities into those that have a high urgency and those which we have to initiate now, and it has to become our way of doing business, like the greener technologies and so on we've heard.
And I mean, you're based in Canada. What kind of cooperation is there in terms of research and innovation? You mentioned the academia worlds, you know, the Marine Institute worlds. Is there enough collaboration? Is there enough discussion? Avoidance of duplication, for example?
Yes, because there's so few of us. I think we heard about the bus this morning with the oceanographers. We maybe could fill a few buses, but it's still a very small research environment. And it was just, I can't express how great it was to be involved through the Galway Agreement with these EU projects, because it was genuine collaboration formed between American, Canadian, and European scientists, which in my 30 years was the first time that some really, truly basin-scale collaborative work came forward. And you've seen already, you know, the kinds of publications that have come out, which is advancing our knowledge to address these questions. So I think for us in Canada, it's been a win-win-win situation, and I just hope that the work we're doing and the data we're sharing will help address these questions on these urgent timelines that we have to deal with.
Okay, before I move on to maybe another question, does anybody want to jump in right now? I think we also have questions through the Slido.com app. Anybody physically want to raise a question? Yes, lady over here, thank you.
Hi, yes, I'm Sheila Heymans from the European Marine Board, and my question is specifically to Andres, actually, and it's about philanthropy. So my question is, what do you think is the best use of your money, given that a lot of research is funded through the Commission and at national level, But obviously there is this problem with getting social sciences involved. So do you think there's a space for you there, and how can we as the research organizations help you make that happen?
Andres, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question. For a start, even the biggest foundations don't have the sort of money you need in order to sustain research infrastructure, ships, facilities of that nature. So it's very clear that the foundations can only do marginal stuff on the natural sciences and on the social sciences as well. We cannot finance whole universities in that sense. But as I mentioned before, I think that we know a lot. When you look at the research programs, whether they're European, whether they're German, whether any national, it takes between 5 and 12 years from asking a question to getting a result from a research project. We don't have that time anymore. So what foundations can do is they have much more freedom, they can act much more quickly. They don't have certain internal delaying procedures, they can be faster. So taking knowledge that has already been produced and making it available in such form that it actually informs decision in business, in resource managers, when you think about fisheries or other marine resources, or policymakers. And it comes both in relation to looking at the ocean and say what needs to improve there, and looking on land, how can we stop all the destructive activities that are still going on? That is not something that the marine research community alone can do. We can, from that community, we can formulate the expectations and the demands. Stop single-use plastic is one of them, but the action has to be delivered on land.
Does anybody else want to come in there on that question? No? Okay, let me go to the one from Louis Cellier. Where's Louis Cellier? Thank you for your question, because it's pretty much like the second question I was going to ask. I'm going to try and do this so that I can turn around and also not be off the mic. Are the objectives of the blue economy, fundamentally growth, compatible with the objective of preservation and restoration of Atlantic Ocean ecosystems? Very good question. And I think, Thandwe, you were talking about this, you know, from your own experience of some of the areas that, you know, potentially are in danger of being exploited. But is there a fundamental compatibility issue between blue economy growth and preservation of these ecosystems?
Yes.
And just, Mike on, yeah.
Thank you for that question. Maybe I would start in answering the question by saying the blue economy concept, as far as I'm convinced, seeks to move nations away from the business as usual of the brown development model, where the oceans have been perceived as the means of free resource extraction and waste dumping. Maybe for me, that's a fundamental answer I can give, because the blue economy is really, it's in a nutshell, maybe I should say, it's seeking to address the issues of competition in the ocean space, where you find conflicting uses competing for the same space, and seeks through ocean governance, and maybe through what I was going to propose as a solution, which is marine spatial planning, to allocate times and space for taking activities in the ocean space at specific, like I've said, at specific times. So for me, there's no conflict as long as one is observing what the blue economy is focusing on, is actually seeking to address exactly the competition and the conflicts that result in further deterioration of the ecosystems as a result of the untenable situation in which one finds the two. And there are tools to regulate it, as I've indicated. And for me, one of the best tools available, which is also, I'm talking for experience because we're piloting a marine spatial planning project in the BCC in all the 3 countries. And we have learned from our experiences that although the same project is presenting the same information, the process has evolved differently in each country. And one country started off, they've even moved up and have a bill. Somebody from South Africa can confirm maybe now it's even an act. And the last time I checked, it was a bill on MSP. Whereas other countries have started through a very multi-sectoral approach, one of the countries involving all the sectors that are involved and making everyone understand that everyone can have space or a certain time allocated to them to do what they need to do in the ocean at a certain time that suits the nature of what they want to do.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Ellen, maybe I think you wanted to jump in there on this as well.
So just to add to that, I think that there is a bit of a conundrum about trying to have a sustainable blue economy when we're seeing everything going down. But I think it's possible, and it's not in the traditional ways. It's seeing the new industries, like we've heard about the concrete. There are other examples from the biotech. The sponges project, for instance, was looking at the microbes within the sponges, and also the potential for the structure of the sponge skeleton to be used in medical applications. So we're going to see the innovation use of the ocean, I think, through biotech approaches and new industries that are greener and so on, rather than the fisheries and extractive kind of industries that have led us to where we are now.
But do you think that there needs to be more of a concerted international effort to ensure that the blue economy doesn't lead to exploitation of the oceans, of the seabeds, in a way that perhaps land has been in the past?
So I think that's recognized for sure. And there's been the G7 meeting in 2018, as recent as that, identified some of these issues. And there was a follow-up meeting in Nairobi to look at the sustainable blue economy. It was the first global meeting to look at that in 2018. So we have some very good outputs. In fact, we heard in the IPBS, some of them were reiterated about controlling unregulated fisheries and subsidies and things like that. So I think those are very much on the minds of the people who control the finances and make the decisions, and that's a good thing. And also the discussions that Murray, I think, mentioned about the the governance structure for biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction is going to be another kind of policy framework for which this can all fit into. So I think we just have to keep our eye on those and fit within them and use them to our advantage rather than trying to reinvent things or going off on a tangent when it'd be an uphill battle to convince people to take another route.
Okay, Andreas, did you want to come in, and maybe to you as well, Shimrit, did you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I definitely think that there is a way to integrate policies and regulations and potentially even incentives when we are doing development in the ocean, when we are allocating funds and efforts for the blue economy. We have to make sure that best available technologies are practiced, and all the cautions you talked about, taking caution in developing, is being implemented. So I think that there is still kind of a gap maybe with some of the policies out there. Think about if we had like a toolkit, which I think is out there, of technologies and innovations from academia and from industry that can help develop our marine environment in a more sustainable way. But at the moment, those innovations are probably at the margins of those applications, when we need to bring them more to the center in a cautious way. But we need to find incentives potentially to do that in the multi-dimensional space of our oceans.
Okay, Andreas, maybe a quick comment on that before we move on to the other questions that are up here.
The quick comment is, yes, I think we agree that we need to ensure that the blue economy is also green, sustainable, and perhaps you use your favorite search engine, Ecosia in my case, to Google how to ensure that the blue economy is green, in order to see how many solutions there already are, in order to do technology assessment, business assessment, all of those things that we do, but we have not applied in the past. Because let's face it, there aren't many maritime or marine industries that we could call sustainable at the moment. On the contrary, are characterized, all of them, by the fact that they destroy the very basis on which they depend. We can turn that around. The ocean is a huge bioreactor in a way that the atmosphere is not. There is so much going on in there. And we see as soon as we protect areas where we have no take zones, that the ocean actually recovers very quickly. It restores its own health quite quickly. So it's not too late to do anything about it, which is why in our Rise Up call we say the first thing to do is to make sure that we restore and that we allow the ocean to heal itself.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. That's an optimistic note. Let's go to Alicia Wilson's, one of the youth ambassadors. Where's Alicia? Very good question, Alicia. What is industry's biggest challenge in working with, number one, government, and number two, NGOs, towards a living and diverse Atlantic Ocean? Thandiwe, do you want to maybe be the first to respond? No? Okay, who wants to? Okay, Shimrit, you have your
Yeah, I can try as industry. Definitely, I think that there is a need to work together. The challenge is sometimes to reach the right people. I think that I'm fortunate enough to also have my PhD hat, which sometimes help me get in front of policymakers and governments, to environmental ministries, etc., and talk about some of these aspects. But typically, it is a challenge because those mechanisms are much slower and much clumsier. I think the governmental institutions in a way to really adapt and adopt innovation in that space. And sometimes we see that actually the industry can help push that types of innovation into the governmental trials. With NGOs, I think that there is a huge need to bind forces, not just on campaigns that are beautiful and important sometimes, but really to take action and to come up with programs that combine. We talked about private and public. I think NGOs and also philanthropic are the other missing link maybe in the chain, to work together, bring concrete action to projects and implementation of different initiatives.
Okay, does anybody else want to comment on that? Yes, Andres?
Industry is so multifaceted. The oil industry that wants to explore offshore reserves has a completely different outlook than the pharmaceutical industry that is interested in genetic information or harvesting marine resources on a continuous basis. So we need to distinguish between the different industries. But I also work with investors in the sector, and to them it is sometimes frustrating to see how government action still maintains the destructive industries that are going around and is actually hindering innovation. We need to do two things. We need to phase out everything that is harming the ocean, and we need to phase in the new technologies, the new business models that actually work by enhancing the quality of the ocean and creating co-benefits in terms of biological diversity and ecosystem services.
But how do you do that? Because we know with the fossil fuel industry that has taken decades and decades, and we're still driving around in cars fueled by diesel or petrol.
There is one industry that loves those subsidies and privileges and access to de-risking instruments that the governments make available to them, and there are other industries that hate them. The political balance between them is not yet right, and we need to work in order to shift that in whatever form. But at the same time, it's also, there are people who say, I have these ideas, we can develop these industries, for example, harvesting a greater variety of seaweed for human consumption. And then they find that market access is restricted, including in the European Union, before it is allowed onto the food market. Things take sometimes too long before it can be brought to market, and that makes it sometimes difficult to actually realize the investment and make that transition from the laboratory, from the invention, from the innovation, into the actual deployment and the business case so that it can be scaled up.
Okay, anybody want to jump in at this stage? Do I see any hands up? I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anybody in the room. Yes, thank you.
I'd like to return to Andreas' affirmation and Ellen's presentation that, Andreas, you said we know enough now to start taking action, and Ellen, I think you led with how much more information we really need to have. I agree with you both, but I think it would be important for us to hear the distinctions so that we and others might not leave here with a confusion. Are we not ready to make steps forward? Or, Andreas, we know enough to start taking some action now where we have industries that are developing using eco-friendly and eco-enhancing capabilities. So might I stir the pot a little bit? Thank you.
Okay, very good. So Ellen, maybe you go first.
Ladies first. I didn't mean to give that impression. We certainly have to take action in the absence of information. I mean, it's not the case that, we have to work with a precautionary approach if we have to. I mean, the urgency demands it. But there is a lot we don't know. We don't know right now, when we look at those nice graphs that were presented from the IPCC today, or even if we look at that heat map that we saw off the coast of Brazil. What does that mean? What's happening in the waters, which I think we were in agreement that we don't know this. I guess you might think that we don't need to know it, or as much as I think we do, because the ecosystems, as we heard this morning, they are unpredictable, and some of the responses may occur very quickly. We certainly have many examples where there's been thresholds that have been crossed and things change dramatically and may never return. So we need to understand, particularly, I think the discussions that we had at the Decade Workshop were to bring up the higher level to try to at least identify these major tipping points if we can, so that we can have a more planned future and not just be responding after the horse is out of the barn. I mean, it is in many ways linked to the urgency of the change and the fact that fish are already on the move. We've got, changing physical conditions and so on.
Okay, Andres?
So we know about the urgency, we know what is harming the ocean, we know what can be done, and there are definitely many no-regrets options that we can implement now without waiting for further research. There are also lots of areas where we need to do more research, where we need to find more, but I do not want us to fall into a collective trap that is called paralysis by analysis. Scientists are very good at falling into that trap.
Okay. Paralysis
Not the
by
ones
analysis. Okay, quick question, one wrap-up question to all of you. Just give me one idea, and as briefly as you can. What one measure could the All-Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance do to promote a healthy and diverse Atlantic Ocean? So we'll start off with you, Andres, and work over to Ellen.
I always have to go first. Anyway, we as the Oceano Azul Foundation do have a program that we want to focus on over the next 36 months. We have had the luck of finding a new field of thermal vents in the Azores. It triggered a memorandum of understanding with the regional government of the Azores to try and establish a marine protected area of 150,000 square kilometers. That's 15% of the EEZ of the Azores and 3% of the EEZ of the European Union. So it's a pretty large area, and over the next 36 months we want to focus on getting that actually implemented, designated with a management plan and with the scientific research to accompany it, so that we see what effects it has. And if it works, and we think it will work, then we would like to see that repeated along the whole chain of the Macaronesian islands. There is lots of co-benefits and synergies to be had if things move along that chain of islands for biological reasons. So that is what we will focus on for the next 36 months and beyond.
Okay, sounds very interesting. To you, Thandiwe, one initiative that the All-Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance can take.
For me,
It should be on, I think. Yeah. We have gremlins in the microphones, I think, today.
no, for me, the greatest threat to biodiversity in our Atlantic Ocean is pollution. We just need to strengthen the measures that are now being implemented to address pollution, including both macro and microplastics, which are really creating a lot of devastation to our living marine resources, but for plants and animals in the ocean. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that. And to you, Shimrit?
I have two, but I'll try and do just one. First of all, I think that some of the policies should be clarified and developed for employing more innovation in that space. So think about incentives for developers, or on the other hand, penalties for developers that are not taking into action measures that promote biodiversity. I think that's something that is currently missing. I see a lot of countries only have environmental impact statements. That's where it's done. What damages are you doing? And no measures of actually offsetting some of that as a part of the commitment for the developer. The other thing is maybe a collective of solutions. The forum can do some kind of a label for tested, validated solutions in the marine space that enhance biodiversity and could be used as a menu for solutions to be applied as are in accordance with different project requirements.
Okay, very good. And finally to you, Ellen.
I'd like to pick up on the recommendation from the Nairobi conference that we have a sustainable blue economy needs to be planned. And I think the way to integrate all the information is through marine spatial planning. We've heard about the data opportunities for sharing and getting that up, the need for engaging all of the sectors that care about the oceans. And this is the means to do it, and also to try to better plan our future in light of the changing conditions we have to deal with. And I know the Atlas Horizon project, as Murray showed you, had done some initial forays into testing some marine spatial planning in some of their case study areas. UNEP has also published a marine spatial planning framework, and I think this is the way to bring everyone together to the same table using the open access data that we're all going to be providing and getting the discussion going and identifying where things need to change and how they should proceed.
Okay, well, thank you so much to all four of you for giving us your insights and feedback. Before we leave our four